Welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific? Brought to you by our producer, IEJ Media, and our sponsor, Bauer Group Asia. More about them in due course. I'm the former military officer, Ray Powell, in California. Down there in Arizona is the former diplomat, Jim Carouso. And Jim, we have an extremely special guest with us today.
We're very excited.
All right. Well, our guest is Senator Todd Young. He is a U.S. Senator from Indiana. He is also a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and now a recognized leader on Indo-Pacific security issues and countering China's economic and maritime coercion. So, Senator Young, welcome.
Thank you, Ray. Good to be with you. Good to be with you, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Senator, you have warned that this competition with China will shape our children's lives in even more fundamental ways. So for the average citizen used to certain basic levels of prosperity and personal freedom, why can't America just take care of America? Why do we have to worry about what happens half a world away in East Asia?
Well, because as you, I think, intimated with the question, our prosperity depends on access to the world's markets. We have a deeply integrated world economy, even accounting for our current emphasis on economic security and making sure we retrench in certain areas and bolster our ability to manufacture key inputs in our economy. We're very dependent on access to global markets. And then our national security requires that we stay engaged in the world so that we can deter any aggression to us or to our friends and help maintain some semblance of order in the world. If we fail to do that, if we retreat behind the boundaries of the United States, then the world will have a stubborn way of finding us, and bad actors will be able to impose their will. Their wishes on the world. So it's really important. We're looked to, because we are the leading power in the world, we're looked to for leadership. We are looked to in terms of doing our part to enforce some semblance of order in the world, and we benefit from our engagement in the world. Chaos benefits dictators and terrorists and those who don't share our values.
So, Senator, that implies that you see at least the risk of chaos and disorder and threats, certainly in the region. And I understand you recently went to the Philippines. What did you see and learn there that has you either hopeful or concerned?
Well, there were sources of both hope and concern from my week in the Philippines back in roughly. It's been a number of months now since I visited, but what I saw there was China asserting itself throughout the South China Sea, becoming increasingly, adventurous and malign and claiming certain stretches of ocean and different features in that ocean for the People's Republic of China. I saw them harassing vessels engaged in commerce and productive economic activity like fishing vessels. And I have to tell you, the atmosphere there was one of being under siege. The Filipinos understand that their way of life is being very directly impacted today by the Chinese Communist Party. Their fishing rights are being challenged. Their military is being threatened. Their government is being intimidated to agree to new boundaries of sovereignty. And so I was encouraged because the Filipinos have been perhaps the most assertive in defending themselves, even though they're a smaller country, they're a less powerful country militarily, but they've been doing what so many of our allies have done over the years. They've been working with the United States to defend those patches of ocean and defend the rules-based order. And when the Philippines go out there to defend sea lines of communication, trade routes, to reaffirm that lines on a map really do matter in the end, and they have to be defended, that benefits the United States. So the fact that our diplomats, our Coast Guard, and our United States Navy were working with the Filipinos when I was there to defend Filipino sovereignty in the South China Sea, that was very important to them, and I think very important to us. We're going to need the Filipinos as we think about maybe a Taiwan contingency. The northern part of the Philippines will be a key strategic area, and perhaps if the U.S. is very directly engaged in that conflict, a stepping off area, an area from which we may direct fires into a conflict zone should that day ever happen. So that's a very direct way in which we have partnered with the Filipinos recently to make clear that we stand with them. They're a treaty ally, and that arguably the South China Sea, that neighborhood is the most dangerous transit area in the world at this point.
Talking about direct fires, you talk like a true Marine. We've seen this dust up with the Philippines, but of course there's also been a lot going on around Taiwan, and of course recently around Japan, and we've seen this increase in tensions now between Japan and China over Taiwan. And so all three of these countries make up something that we refer to as the first island chain. So what is the first island chain, and why should Americans worry about what happens inside or outside that first island chain?
Well, the first island chain, it's a series of island territories, that run outside of the perimeter of China. It includes Taiwan. This is a key shipping transit area, and if the U.S. Aims to continue to be involved in international commerce, which we do and we must, in order to again sustain our way of life in this global economy, we will and must continue to be able to trade through that area. So any efforts to control territory within that first island chain have to be thought of as efforts to gain strategic ground that would allow an adversary to disrupt our lines of trade. And therefore, we have to continue to defend that territory and use our United States Navy to make clear that we will continue to, insist that rules be followed to allow free transit and free trade through the first island chain. Beyond that, the first island chain is believed to be the first of several steps that our primary adversary, China, aims to ultimately take, getting more control first over the first island chain, moving on to a second island chain, and then ultimately gaining control of the entire Pacific. That is not their theater to own. We don't believe that the Pacific should be regarded as a Chinese sphere of influence, but instead a shared resource for free people to engage in free trade and other forms of intercourse, communication, travel that help here again make up a certain way of life that are important to the American people and to our allies. So that's really what we're defending here, are these key nodes of the international system that are right outside of the perimeter of the People's Republic of China.
So, Senator, it seems that you've sponsored some legislation regarding our maritime capabilities, which implies we are deficient in that right now, or at least our allies are, or something. Could you describe briefly what the legislation is meant to do?
Sure, sure. Well, so much of my focus in recent years has been on non-military areas of competition between the United States and our friends and partners and the People's Republic of China and other autocratic-led countries. So among those areas are focusing on key tech areas, quantum computing, AI, and emerging biotech. We've also focused on, and this gets directly to your question, making sure that we have the shipbuilding capacity to engage reliably in global commerce and to defend our interests worldwide. Then the other maritime sort of initiative that I've been focused on involves China's disregard of its neighbors and other countries around the globe when it comes to the environment. There are natural resources that for example, we saw in the Philippines, which are literally being claimed by China and stolen by China. Fishing, for example, the illegal fishing that the Chinese are involved in the South China Sea undermines the economy and the way of life of the Filipino people. So my legislation, which we've called the HARPOON Act, helping allies respond to piracy, overfishing, and oceanic negligence, aims to make sure that the U.S. government is tooled to help these countries defend their natural resources. We probably need to have similar authorities on the books as it relates to timber and other natural resources that the Chinese are stealing throughout the world in order to help bankroll some of their malign activities around the world and sustain their leadership class. But this one is focused on illegal fishing, something we hear from our Navy and Coast Guard leadership that remains an acute problem. Here again, by passing these sorts of laws and having authorities on the books, this helps deter this sort of behavior from our adversaries and prevents any escalation, hopefully, of their behavior in the future.
So I'd like to dig in a little bit to both of those pieces of legislation. So you mentioned the HARPOON Act, but also what you've called the SHIPS Act. So let's get to the SHIPS Act. Obviously, we've seen all the numbers about how China dominates the shipbuilding industry. And from a military and security perspective, were we to get, God forbid, into some kind of a conflict, a major power conflict with China, the ability to produce ships, which is something that won us World War II, we simply don't have right now. What does the SHIPS Act do to help us change the trajectory of American shipbuilding?
So we literally need to reconstitute our ability to manufacture vessels at scale in this country, both U.S. Navy vessels and merchant vessels. And this legislation focuses on the merchant side of things. China has they can produce well over 1,000 merchant vessels in a given year. In a given year, they could produce over 1,000. That's how much productive capacity they have. We have the capacity in this country in a cheerful scenario to produce 5. Now, we don't aim to compete with the over 1,000 vessel a year capacity China has. They probably have overcapacity. But we do need to take risk out of our current dependence. We need more than 80 ocean-going vessels here in the United States to, in time of peace, carry men and to carry our goods and our commodities overseas, and to bring key inputs into the United States. In time of war, we of course need the ability to repair vessels, to produce new vessels rapidly and of sufficient quality, and we obviously need the ability to move our men and women in uniform and our military material into theater. All those things would happen on merchant vessels. We aim to build 250 vessels over the next 10 years through the Ships for America Act, unlock private capital investment in existing shipyards, foreign capital as well as domestic capital, and automate shipyards so that we can produce to the level of quality and efficiency that Japan and South Korea, our close friends, can. And we'll learn from them. That's part of this vision associated with the Ships for America Act. The legislation also creates mechanisms to really emphasize workforce development, making sure that the skilled trades exist here in the United States to build a sufficient number of merchant vessels. When those employees aren't gainfully employed building merchant vessels, or when they're needed to build other types of vessels, they can go from merchant to Navy. And then the last piece of this is we need to train more merchant mariners to work on those vessels. Here again, we would put a much greater weight of investment at Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy, and train more merchant mariners through our existing maritime academies, like the Maine Maritime Academy and many other state maritime academies that currently exist. So that's a lot to accomplish in one bill. Industry tells us it is eminently achievable to take risk out of our existing supply chains and restore our ship manufacturing capability by building 250 vessels over a 10-year period. But it's going to take some resources to change the cost structure of building in this country. It's also probably going to require bringing into production new shipbuilding, new shipyards on the Great Lakes, on the Gulf of America. And we've already seen a lot of industry interest in that prospect. But here again, they're looking for some subsidies, because we know that our adversaries offer subsidies for shipbuilding, because it's understood by them that we have an economic and national security premium that needs to be built into every vessel that is produced. The Japanese, the South Koreans understand it as well. We're increasingly understanding that we need to build subsidies into the key inputs of our economy that invoke national security concerns.
So this is clearly a multi-year process. This is highly complicated. Just the training of welders, sort of like for nuclear submarines, is a big ask. How can our allies who've already offered to work with us, Japan, Korea, Finland, Italy, major shipbuilding countries, how do you see them folding their capabilities into what you're trying to do?
The president understands, because we worked very closely with him on this bipartisan effort. He understands that we need our allies, the South Koreans in particular, but also the Japanese, some of our European partners. We need their investment, but we also need their expertise, which tends to come with the investment. They want to protect their investment, right? So the South Korean Hanwha, they've purchased the Philadelphia shipyard. And you will increasingly see, if you visit the Hanwha Philly shipyard, you'll see South Korean middle managers there overseeing the work, teaching American workers about the best-in-class processes and technologies that they use to build vessels today. Let's use our allies as force multipliers and figure out how to bring their design and production standards to bear on this problem set. And so that's how we see this working. There is great interest by the South Koreans in particular, and they will be key to helping us achieve the 250 vessel goal over the next 10 years. And they have a lot of spare capital too right now in their economy. So they're looking for places to invest. This is a critical moment, and shame on us if we don't seize this opportunity. The South Koreans visit me on a regular basis. Their chambers of commerce, their large shipbuilding companies, and they express their enthusiasm for this effort. Blessedly, we have presidential level support, which we have not in recent history until the Trump administration came in. And I think that will be key to sustaining the political momentum to get the Ships for America Act done. I'll also say this. Our labor unions are existing conduits through which we can train so much of our workforce to a very high standard. And they have associated themselves with this Ships for America Act. And from a political standpoint, I think they will help give us the will in Congress to get this across the line.
I know your time is very limited, so I want to get back to HARPOON Act very quickly. Illegal shipping, illegal fishing is one of those sort of esoteric topics that oftentimes just sort of concerns either people who are concerned overseas, like the Indo-Pacific podcast that you're on, or environmentalists.
Yeah.
But and most Americans don't think about where their seafood comes from. But China has been referred to as the superpower of fish, and they are out there in massive numbers, basically harvesting all of the fish in large portions of the sea. What can we do about that?
Well, several things. Thank you for asking. I'm on the Commerce Committee, and to me, it is as much a national security committee as the Armed Services Committee. And within the Commerce Committee jurisdiction is the United States Coast Guard. And our Coast Guard, for a fairly modest amount of money in the annual budget, has a presence in places around the world. And it's a very sort of light touch type of presence, but their activity involves technical training other Coast Guards and some intelligence agencies and other arms of government how to detect, counter, deter illegal fishing action. They are the best in class. In some cases, they are operationally aligned with and very active and working with friendly and partner Coast Guards. We need a greater presence by the Coast Guard in particular, but also the Navy. But that has been much discussed, our need to build out a more robust naval presence. But I think we also need a larger Coast Guard to continue to deal with this problem set. The Coast Guard has law enforcement training and responsibilities and authorities that the Navy does not. And so I think they're uniquely situated to handle this problem. In the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, Congress authorized a lot more Coast Guard vessels. I think that was the right thing to do. So it's understood that we need to begin to use the Coast Guard in countering these so-called gray zone activities in a more effective way. My HARPOON Act is just an effort to clarify that the Coast Guard has these authorities, the Navy has these authorities, and hopefully to persuade the administration to use the authorities to this is the economic future that's being stolen from so many countries throughout the Indo-Pacific by the Chinese Communist Party, and they'll continue to press until resisted. And we don't have sufficient resources to do all of this alone, but the Coast Guard in particular can be a really valuable lever to counter some of these activities. And I mentioned timber earlier. That may have surprised you, but the dollar figure of stolen timber is actually greater than the amount of fish stolen by the Chinese. So we need some effort there. That's a problem set that I may be looking at in coming years. And just this resource extraction, it's almost a neo-colonial sort of resource extraction that we see from the Chinese. And it creates the opportunity for us to work with some unconventional, create some unconventional coalitions to counter this. The environmental community. When I visited the Philippines, the World Wildlife Fund was sitting at the very table of the local Coast Guard with U.S. Navy presence there, and some of our diplomats, and they all came from different perspectives and maybe had, in some sense, different motivations for their presence to talk about how we could prevent continued Chinese predation on ocean resources. But I think we need to leverage these things because it could yield real dividends in resisting this misbehavior moving forward.
Well, Senator, our staff your staff tells us that you've got to get moving to your next appointment.
Sorry.
And so we thank you for all the time together. But before you go, we've got your Indiana Hoosiers American football team facing off number 2 in the polls, facing off against the number 1 Ohio State Buckeyes this weekend. Now, this is going to air after the game, so go ahead and give us the final score, if you would. How badly are the Hoosiers going to beat the Buckeyes on Saturday?
Well, I will venture a final score because I see you're wearing Hoosier cream and crimson. So
sure, why not?
Thank you for doing that, Ray. Listen, America's team, the Indiana Hoosiers, will win by a field goal. It will be late in the game. We will shock much of the world of commentators and professional prognosticators, and we will defeat the Ohio State Buckeyes and win the Big Ten championship and vault ourselves to first in the country in football. That's my prediction.
All right, that's great to know. Thank you to Senator Todd Young, United States Senator and professional sports analyst. Thank you very much, sir.
Out here. Thanks, guys.
And once again, our sponsor is Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets. My co-host, Jim Carouso, is a senior advisor with Bauer Group, and you can visit their website at BauerGroupAsia.com. Jim, first of all, it's a great honor to have a U.S. Senator join us, and it's good to know that we've got serious legislators actually thinking about some of these issues that, I think sometimes we worry that aren't really getting the kind of attention they need.
Well, absolutely. He was very clear how important he sees the region. He seems to appreciate the fact that it's been in need of more resources to accomplish this mission. The problem of working with allies more closely. What we didn't get to ask him, though, is our understanding that the national security strategy should be coming out any moment now. The strong rumors are it's going to focus on homeland and Western Hemisphere. So how will that correspond with more resources for the Indo-Pacific when everything's being focused around here?
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of apprehension about that. I share it. Also, though, if we do, in fact, increase the resources for the U.S. Coast Guard, more resources is more resources. And so, as we talked about, I think all around the Indo-Pacific, there is a desire to have greater U.S. Coast Guard involvement. And the fact is, as one might expect, most of the U.S. Coast Guard is focused on the U.S. coast. How about that? And even inland waterways and all the rest of that stuff. So, the Coast Guard is not primarily a, a deployable asset. It's supposed to be deployable if we need it, but that's not its primary mission, and that's not what it's primarily structured for. So I think that there has to be a really serious conversation within the Department of Homeland Security and the national security community, and about, are we going to resource the U.S. Coast Guard to do these capacity building missions, these international transit types of missions that it's never been resourced to do before?
Well, let's remember, Coast Guard is law enforcement as opposed to the military. So its role, if we're going to have law enforcement, uh, certainly in the region, requires the Coast Guard. And, it's a huge area with all these countries and islands that are under resourced themselves. And they love it when the Coast Guard comes and gives them training and has their people on board the ships to help enforce their own laws.
Yeah.
So, it's
I
a
think
vital
that's a great
resource.
point, Jim. And it brings up two things. One, of course, is that ultimately you need to have countries that are able to protect their own waters, right? And that's hard so, that's the capacity building thing. And that's really, really hard when the adversary, People's Republic of China, is building their Coast Guard into a huge paramilitary force that is primarily, at least the part of it that we see, focused on sovereignty assertion, right? And so then all of a sudden you have a 8, 10, 12,000 ton ship show up that it says Coast Guard, and it doesn't seem to be guarding its own coast. It's asserting China's sovereignty, hundreds, if not even over 1,000 miles away from its own coast.
Right. So what we have is Senator Young having what I thought were great ideas, but he mentioned subsidies for building new shipyards and new ships and training, and more resources for the Coast Guard. Meanwhile, we don't know what the focus is going to be of this national security strategy, or in general, how we're going to prioritize our national security.
And Jim, so we have a little extra time today because that was a shorter interview. You and I saw a lot of congressional delegations, and to be honest, they didn't all strike us as tremendously productive.
I'm shocked.
Sometimes sometimes you have these folks show up, and it just seemed that they were focused on a lot of things that were not what we sort of thought they were coming for, or at least not what their delegation was advertised as. To be frank, especially when they came with the half the plane full of congressional spouses, they just had other things on their minds. So it is always encouraging when you do see a legislator who has gone abroad and come back and learned things and turned it into legislation.
Right. When they come with serious purpose to learn, not just to lecture, to learn and to listen and to understand. Yeah, those are gold. And
Yeah.
clearly, Senator Young did that when he went to the Philippines.
Well, he seems like a
Speaking,
serious guy. He seemed that way when I first met him.
speaking when you first met him,
Uh,
apparently you have a story about meeting him.
I did.
What did you
So
do?
at, it was one of those great shining moments in the history of Ray Powell. So when it's I of course went to Capitol Hill to testify, but before a different committee, one that Senator Young was not on. But his office contacted me and said, "Hey, he would like to talk to you about some things." And they mentioned the HARPOON Act and the Ships Act and things. I said, "Great, I'd love to go talk to him." I was honored that he wanted to talk to me. So I went to his office and I sat there in the waiting room and waited for him to come back from wherever he was at. And while I was sitting there, this fellow walks in and comes in and shakes my hand and says, "Hey, how are you?" Young looking guy, probably a staffer. And so I said, "Hi, I'm Ray Powell." And he goes, "Oh yeah, I'm Todd Young." Um, so obviously I was completely flustered at that point. Clearly, I did not know what Senator Young looked like, which if I was a good I don't know, say military officer who did, important staff work on things, you would think that would be like one of those things you would not want to screw up, right?
I'm glad when you were my staffer, you didn't do that to me.
Well, not that you know of. Um, so, um, but after that, we got into the meeting room and we had his staff there, and he was there. And he basically looks at me and says, what do you want to talk about? And, they had invited me and they sort of listed these things. And I guess in my head, and okay, and this actually gets to a point where I did do this to you. I kind of just thought that he was running the agenda, right? And so here's what I did when I did this to you. You just didn't know about it. Is when I went to see Admiral Harry Harris for the first time, when we thought he was coming to Australia as the ambassador, because that was the plan originally. I went to visit him in his office, and I went thinking, I'm here to answer his questions about what it's like at U.S. Embassy Australia. But the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and you have spent much time at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, you know exactly how that place is structured, is not used to colonels coming into his office and saying, "So, boss, what do you want to talk about?" So I had no particular agenda. And he clearly did not know what to do with that. I thought, he'd have questions for me. So yes, a couple of great, never ever, if you're a diplomat or a military officer listening to this, mid-level, rising in your, don't do what I have done. If you actually go to visit a U.S. senator, do basic research like, what does his face look like?
Wise words, Raymond.
Wise words from Ray Powell. Speaking of wise words, we want to thank our very wise producer, Ian Ellis Jones, and his very wise company, IEJ Media, for putting us out. We also want to thank him for his very wise military and geopolitical graphics he puts out on his X account at Ian Ellis Jones. We know that you're going to want to go and check that out. Of course, if you enjoyed this episode, you want to subscribe and follow us. You can see us on the YouTube channel, youtube.com @IP Podcast. And then, of course, on our social media accounts, X, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You can also email us at our email account, indopacificpodcast@gmail.com. That's indopacificpodcast@gmail.com. And finally, we want to encourage you to go and visit our sponsor, Bauer Group Asia. Visit them at their website, bauergroupasia.com. And for Jim and Ian, I'm Ray. Thanks again to Senator Young, and join us again next time on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific?